So Bill Maher went on Ben Shapiro's show, which is kind of surprising because for years and years and years, he positioned himself as, he's the Democratic guy, he's the liberal guy or the left guy. He had his show Politically Incorrect, which he lost because he said the people who flew the planes into the towers on 9/11 weren't cowards. We could say they're terrorists, we could say they're awful people, but you can't say they're cowards because they stayed in the plane as it hit the building. Lost his show for that reason. Then he went to Real Time with Bill Maher, and he's been on that show since, 2003 or something like that? And there has been a shift in what Bill Maher talks about on his show, almost a shift to some extent in how he identifies, how he sees himself in the political landscape and on the political spectrum. And the biggest shift in Maher is more in focus. So in the past, he may have focused more on stuff like climate change, income and wealth inequality, war, and then now over time, he's just not interested in that stuff anymore, and he's interested in more things that are generally associated with the right. This is a very clear trend, and we've seen it because we've covered him plenty on our show, right? So he went on Ben Shapiro's show. Now, on that alone, I'm not hating. It's possible to go in to Ben Shapiro's show and just debate him the entire time and disagree with him the entire time. And it could be cordial, it could be kind, but, that's one way it could go down. Now, I'll admit, I didn't watch the whole interview. You have to watch the entire interview in order to get a sense of whether or not he does that. I'll say that my guess is he probably doesn't, based on this clip that we have here. But don't get it twisted. I'm sure in the past, Bill Maher never would have gone on Ben Shapiro's show. And I think he probably wouldn't have gone on his show in the past because he would have thought that Shapiro was kind of a ridiculous person. But now he's sort of snuggling up to him a little bit, charming him a little bit. And I wanted to play this clip for you and then react to it. So Bill Maher says, quote, "I haven't changed at all. My politics hasn't changed. They've changed." Adding, quote, "Letting 3-year-olds decide what gender they are. This wasn't something 5 years ago." Okay, so let's watch it and then we'll talk about it.
But when you say woke, it's become, and I make fun of it too, because it's become an eye roll in many ways. If woke, I assume at a certain moment, and it wasn't that long ago before we didn't have the term. I only heard it, I don't know what it was, 3-4 years ago, 5 years ago at most, when we heard the term woke, and it was like alert to injustice. I'm like, okay, I'm down with that. I always have been. I hope people still understand that about me. But yes, it became sort of a byword for a lot of this goofy stuff. That's what I'm always railing against. That's why, they play me on Fox News now.
Yeah, I mean,
all right, so let's pause here and just talk about this real quick. So this is an area where Maher is not totally off base here. There is plenty of stuff that's quote-unquote woke or quote-unquote cancel culture that does sometimes get silly. We've talked about it before, whether it's some conservative speaker who's trying to talk at a campus and then they get, protested and they're not allowed to speak or whatever. When we talk about quote-unquote wokeness, you think about college kids with pink hair, blue hair, and they're authoritarian along with their leftism, and the authoritarianism is not only wrong in principle, but also just a bad look for the left. Do I think that's a problem? I do think that's a problem. But at the same time, the reason why people despise Bill Maher, who are on the left now, is because, that's all you talk about. There's this whole cottage industry now of people who only focus on that issue. When if you make a list of the biggest problems that the world is facing right now, the idea of wokeness run amok doesn't crack the top 10. It doesn't. I mean, you have rampant political corruption where bribery is basically legal in the United States, and that's to say nothing of foreign countries where I'm sure it's just as bad, if not worse, right? You have climate change, an apocalyptic climate scenario. You have endless war, whether it's the U.S. military budget being colossally bloated and us waging all these wars and having 700 to 900 military bases around the world. You have the Russian invasion of Ukraine. You have, your rights are basically gone as a result of the Patriot Act. There's no protection from unreasonable search and seizure, etc. There's torture. You have incredible levels of income and wealth inequality, just astonishing, where regular people just can't get by, and the system is rigged against them, and we don't have strong unions, so we don't have a strong working class. There's just an outright class war being waged by the 1% and the corporations and the billionaires on average people. We don't have universal health care in the country, so 45,000 people die every year because they don't have health care. All of these things are way more important than anything involving a college kid with pink hair or blue hair. Now, you could argue, hey, sometimes those things cross over into the real world where, because of that mindset, people support these social media censorship purges, etc. That is a massive problem, but I frame that problem more as a free speech issue. So the solution to that problem is to do what? To regulate all the big social media companies like their public utilities. That's the solution to that problem. Now, what happens is with a lot of people on the right and Bill Maher, instead of talking about that solution in a serious way, all they want to do is beat up on the pink-haired college kid as if that's brave, you know, as if that's edgy. It's not. It's the easiest thing in the world to do. You know, like, nobody is a fan of those loud, obnoxious college kids who don't know what the fuck they're talking about, and they just want to ban everybody or censor everybody who disagrees with them. It's so easy to beat up on. That's not hard. That's not hard. So, but he makes it seem like it's so brave, and it's not. And now it's all you talk about, Bill Maher. So anyway, let's continue. He just brought up the Fox News thing. Let's see what they say.
How do you feel about that? Because you went from the guy who was...
I feel... Look,
he was going to say, I feel good. He was going to say, I feel good about that. He was going to say, I feel good about that. That's what he was going to say. Now, I don't know about you guys, but if I get praise from some corner where I disagree with 90%, I would probably come out there and say, look, I disagree with them on 90% of things, and here's why. They're just using me as like the token liberal to beat up on people on the left. Because that is what they do. It's a trick. It's like when Fox News brings on the gay person to be like, gay people sure are uppity and ask for too much, right? So it's not something to be proud of, but he does seem kind of proud of it.
Haven't changed at all. My politics hasn't changed. They've changed. People say to me sometimes, you know, have you changed? No. It's that 5 years ago, no one was talking about defunding the police.
Okay. He says he hasn't changed. Here's how we know that's not true. He is the only Bernie Sanders to Amy Klobuchar voter in the entire country. The Trump era broke his brain. It genuinely did. He started believing every single mainstream media, conventional wisdom, bullshit talking point about how we need to move to the center, we need to be more moderate in order to win, and so he went from supporting Bernie Sanders in 2016 to supporting Amy Klobuchar in 2020. You're telling me you haven't changed when you go from one candidate who represents social democracy to one who represents conventional wisdom, centrist corporatism? Of course you've changed. You've changed massively. That's obvious to anybody with a brain. But he says, no, I haven't changed. No, you definitely have changed. Even if it's just, you've changed substantively because you went from Bernie to Klobuchar. But then you've also changed. The biggest point here, guys, is in terms of his focus and the stuff he cares about and talks about. Every week on his show, it's, oh my God, the left is stupid, cancel culture is stupid, wokeness is stupid. But we got it. Do you have anything to say right now about climate change? Do you have anything to say right now about income and wealth inequality? Do you have anything to say about corruption? Do you have anything to say about war? Do you have anything to say about any of the things that really, really matter? Or, since he's a multi-millionaire, does he feel comfortable? And so now he goes after the easy targets who give, you know, which allows Fox News to give him the applause. Then he brings up defund the police. Guys, look, you know this. I'm not a fan of defund the police. I think it's a terrible slogan. If what you mean by defund the police is, well, actually what we want to do is take a certain percentage of the budget and put it towards mental health care and, have people show up in certain situations without guns to de-escalate and help people psychologically. And, well, I'm with you on that. That's fine. But defund the police obviously is not a slogan that works because it polls at fucking 18%. So, again, I agree with Bill Maher on this. But, there's only like one Democrat who even ran on defund the police. The idea that this is like a big problem in the country, it's not. This notion that like Democrats are soft on crime is total bullshit. If anything, they're still too hard on crime because they haven't legalized marijuana. We still got the drug war going on. So instead of hitting them from the left and saying, you should probably legalize marijuana, you should probably end the drug war, we should probably free all the nonviolent drug offenders, he's feeding into the right-wing framing and saying, no, the problem is the Democrats are too soft on crime. There's one person who I know who ran in national politics on defund the police. Her name is Cori Bush, and she won. And the reason why she ran on it and the reason she won is because she represents Ferguson, Missouri. This idea that it's this big problem, it's not. Is that the right talks about it 24/7 and acts like it's all the left is talking about. And so they build up this straw man and this boogeyman of the left, and he's feeding into that.
I never heard that phrase 5 years ago. That's not me changing. That's things changing. I'm reacting to it, as I've always been.
No, you are giving into the right-wing bogus framing, which is taking the most radical, unpopular elements of the left and defining it as the left. That's what you're doing.
Letting 3-year-olds decide what gender they are. This wasn't something 5 years ago.
Now let's talk about this real quick. So Texas just passed a law that basically said, if you have a transgender kid, the state can take your kid from you because that's child abuse. That's what they said. Now, their reasoning is, well, there's plenty of like weird liberal parents who would like purposely confuse their kids into thinking that they're transgender when they're not transgender. And so, but if you're tricking your kid when it comes to biological sex stuff and gender stuff, then what you're doing is child abuse, so we're going to take your kid from you. Now, in reality, I have no idea what percentage of weird liberal parents are like pushing weird gender stuff on their kids when they don't know anything about it and they don't think about it, but they sort of make them think about it. I don't know if that's a thing. I don't know how often it is a thing, how big of a problem it is. But what I do think is, just like you can kind of sense when a kid is gay, even when they're very young. Like sometimes you just know. Like, oh, yeah, that kid seems like he's probably gay, right? It could probably be the same thing for transgenderism. Like somebody just always loves dressing up as the opposite sex, and so they are trans even if they're a 3-year-old or 4-year-old or whatever. It's possible. Now, look, we don't know because, they're kind of too young to know, and they haven't grown yet, and they haven't hit puberty yet, etc. So if you want to have a conversation about, look, what's the line where you should be able to actually get the surgery and do a hard transition, I think that's a fair conversation. I think that's a fine conversation. I don't think it's transphobic to have that conversation. But what you don't hear from Maher here, and maybe it's because he doesn't know about the law. I don't know. We'd have to see. But what you don't hear is Maher saying, hey, what Texas is doing is going way too far. The idea that every parent with a trans kid is just like abusive and pushing that ideology on their kids, I think that's a massive stretch. And that's a claim, by the way, that requires evidence. If you're saying these weird parents are pushing this gender ideology on their kid, you would need to prove that. You need to do an investigation. You need to prove that. You need to show that the kid genuinely identifies with the gender that they biologically are or whatever in order to make that case. But, if you're not criticizing that law, what you're doing is saying, I believe in a very large and authoritarian government that can break up families willy-nilly. And a lot of conservatives pretend like they want small government and they believe in the family, but this would be an instance of a very large government, an authoritarian government, breaking up families. So that law goes way too far. Anybody and everybody should be able to say that. But the conversation about should there be rules or laws or regulations around at what age you can have an actual transition, well, of course, I think that's a reasonable conversation. But I'll also say I'm not taking a position on that because I don't know. I'm not an expert. I'm not trans. I'm not a scientist. So my opinion on it, I don't feel confident in my opinion on it because I could just be wrong with whatever I think about it. So that's more of a conversation for other people to have, for trans people to have, for experts to have, etc. But there is a reasonable conversation to be had there. But the issue here with what Maher is saying is he doesn't understand that there's a flip side extremism that he's feeding right now. And that flip side extremism is, well, the state government of Texas is doing something about the thing that you're talking about, Bill. And what they're doing is far too extreme. And I don't think he brings it up. We'll see if he brings it up. And that deserves commentary, and that deserves criticism. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's coming from Bill Maher.
Free speech, used to be a left-wing thing that we were proud and owned, and now that seems to be under attack. So again, I think I've stayed the same.
Okay. Yeah, free speech. But here's the thing. Everybody in practice is actually against free speech. We've talked about it before. There are plenty of lefties who are genuinely authoritarian left who would love to ban from social media people who disagree with them. But the idea that that's not the case on the right is preposterous. I mean, there was a massive purge and banning of Antifa accounts. The idea that left-wingers don't get targeted with an anti-free speech crackdowns is ridiculous. The Donald subreddit was banned, but so was the Chapo Trap House one. There's been a purge of a number of lefties on Twitter under the guise of this is Russian disinformation. And this was literally way before the invasion of Ukraine. This was during the 2016 election. And a lot of those people had nothing to do with Russian disinformation. Donald Trump, the patron saint of, political incorrectness and anti-wokeness, is a guy who sued Bill Maher because Bill Maher told a politically incorrect joke where he said, Trump, you need to prove that you're not the love child of your mother and an orangutan because the color of your hair only occurs among orangutans. So, you know, he said we should open up the libel laws and sue the media when they write articles we don't like. This is Donald Trump, the guy who says flag burning should be punished with up to a year in jail. Flag burning is like one of the key free speech issues that even Antonin Scalia on the Supreme Court said, I might not like it, but that's free speech. That's free expression. Trump's against that. So, again, this idea that the right actually embraces freedom of speech, no, in practice, they do not. They might use the terminology and pretend like they support it, but they don't actually support it. And unfortunately, I agree, there is many elements of the left that don't support it. I wish they did. But look, this is the new Bill Maher, and he thinks he hasn't changed. He definitely has changed, even if at minimum you say it's just in his focus and the stuff he cares about. But really, it's more than that, because he went from Bernie Sanders to Amy Klobuchar. You cannot do that and say that you didn't change. You absolutely did. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.